It's a long time coming to say this to anyone. It's nerve-wracking and a little scary because obviously these conversations still go against the agreed narrative. Elavil was one of these tricyclic antidepressants that caused many fatalities in the 90s. What I found out later is 250 milligrams would be considered the highest dose for somebody institutionalized. He had me on 600 milligrams, having me smell it whenever I felt sort of drawn to men. It's like The House at the End of the Street, that type of horror movie, because we had a primal scream workroom that we built in our basement, padded walls, the whole thing. Adults who go to seek help by a mental health professional are already vulnerable, traumatized. I recognized years later in the gender world why kids end up going to ask for help, how they were now being ensnared, how they believed what they were being told, the indoctrination, the cultic mentality. Gender affirmative care is the new euphemism for conversion therapy.
Welcome, Peter Gajdics, to Beyond Gender.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, I've been very, very excited to have this conversation, and I think it's going to be extremely informative, but kind of a difficult conversation. I think most of our viewers will never have heard of you. So could you, first of all, I want to say, you were arguably at the forefront of the campaign to ban conversion therapy in Canada. And you have since realized that what you supported was not what you thought you were campaigning for. So could you give the viewers just that realization, what you thought it was, what you now realize it is in a nutshell, and then give us a little bit of your history?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you, Stella, and Mia, of course, for inviting me here. Can I say just quickly, though, it's a long time coming to say this to anyone. It's nerve-wracking, I feel, and a little scary because obviously these conversations still go against the agreed narrative. And in my own world, I've been published, and the publishing world is extremely leftist, you could say. And there's always a risk, when you speak out about these things, that you could just suddenly, lose publication and be blacklisted. It in effect, it's horrifying. So yes, so I'm 61. Had to think 61, and I went through my treatment in my 30s with a psychiatrist, and I can come back to that, but I spent the next decades trying what I thought was to speak out against treatments of sexual orientation. I lived through it, 6-year treatment. I initiated the first Canadian municipal ban in Vancouver, British Columbia. Then I joined forces with others for the national ban, which came into effect 2022. My goal all along was simply to end treatments, period. All treatments, period. Whether it was for people who were gay, lesbian, or at the time, and these definitions have changed over the years, but at the time for even people who, called themselves trans, whatever, I didn't really care. I saw the treatments for them similar to how the treatments occurred for me, because part of my treatment involved sort of, these terms didn't exist at the time, but sort of gender expression, masculinity, femininity. And so my psychiatrist sort of attacked that in me as well, in addition to other things he did. Wow. So, my goal was to just end treatments. I thought, okay, as long as all treatments can end, we are good. Just let people develop naturally, explore naturally, find themselves naturally, get the support they need to do all of that in a healthy, productive way, and just have treatments ended. That's what I thought bans on conversion therapy would do. They would end all treatments. So I included the T, trans, when the T started to appear, which wasn't, didn't always form part of that acronym. It started to appear for me. I noticed it like in 2006, 2007. And that conflation made me very uncomfortable at the time because I knew then, I mean, even though these things have evolved over the years, I even knew then, we're talking about two different types of
Mm-hmm.
developmental processes, sexual orientation, gender, whatever that meant, sort of, as I say, masculinity, femininity, butch girls, effeminate boys, androgynous, that made me uncomfortable, the conflation. And those types of warning signs occurred over the years, but I just moved forward. When the ban came into effect, well, actually in 2020, everything sort of exploded for me, as I'm sure they did for everyone globally with COVID outbreak. And I don't know if this was all planned in some way, but the whole narrative around gender seemed to shift in 2020, or at least I became aware of things that I wasn't aware of up till then. The whole quote ideology of gender I became aware of, and there was an ideology because I suddenly learned about this term gender affirmative care. I'd heard of it, but I always thought it just meant supporting the existence of people who were gay, supporting the existence of people who said they were trans, period. Just, not making them invisible, just acknowledging that they existed. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds good, gender affirmative care. I didn't understand that it actually meant, immediate, no gatekeeping, access to puberty blockers, sex hormones, surgeries in some cases. So I started to understand that. I understood all these terms, these euphemisms, top surgery, bottom surgery. I mean, like I never really knew. Okay, well, top surgery, okay, mastectomies. Up till 2020, I understood that if there were treatments for people who had previously called themselves trans, i.e., transsexuals, we were talking about adults. I never claimed to always understand what that experience would be like for those people, although I'd experienced significant gender dysphoria in my childhood. I didn't claim to understand it, but it was for adults. Okay. It became clear very quickly in 2020 that these processes, these medicalized treatments, were for minors.
And Peter, could I
Yes.
ask you, before we get further into that, because I hear where you're going, could we go back to one, you had gender dysphoria in childhood, and two, I'm very keen to hear about what you experienced in your 30s and
Yeah.
how that panned out.
Just because it's such a long and complicated story, so that's fine.
Yes.
There's no short answer, I don't think.
For sure. And I can hit all the bells in terms of what happened to me. I don't not like this concept of trigger warnings in today's world. It just feels overly, coddling. But I suppose I can say that it's pretty distressing to hear for some people, I'm sure. And it's not something I like talk about a lot anymore, the details of it. So I went to the psychiatrist when I was 24. I'd come out as gay. Um, didn't go well. Rejection from family. I fled to a new city. I went to this psychiatrist for psychotherapy to reconcile my sexuality. As a child, I had experienced childhood sexual molestation. This was the 70s, so extreme confusion growing up around my sexuality, not just being same-sex attracted, but the object of my attraction was the same sex as my abuser, and that for survivors is extremely confusing because the desire is always linked to abuse. So I was very confused. Went to the psychiatrist. Within a short time, he put me on medication, sedative, antidepressants, and then I saw this man for 6 years. For 5 of those 6 years, he had me live isolated in a house with other patients. So there were about between 5 and 6 of us at all times in this house. He put me on these medications, and they quickly became a means toward suppressing my sexuality,
Was this
silencing.
around 1990 or what was the
Yeah, I
years
went
then?
to him in 1989,
Wow.
December. Yeah, December 1989 for the consultations, and then January 1990, full on treatment started, and it was a lot very quick. So 2 to 3 sessions a week. And I'll just say quickly for those international viewers, I went to a psychiatrist because in Canada, psychiatry is covered under our medical plan. So
Mm.
for me, as a 24-year-old, I didn't have to pay, right? Which was significant.
But also there's a presumption that he's accredited, he's top notch as a
Of course.
psychiatrist, so there's a
Yes.
And
kind of a,
can
yeah.
can I just inject a bit of context as well that I took from reading your story? We're talking late 1980s, the peak of the satanic panic, the recovered memory movement, and your psychiatrist sounds like well, a homophobe, obviously, but a crank of a similar genre. It's that same mad time in psychiatry that
Yeah.
you had the
Yeah.
misfortune of colliding with.
And he had you all he had you all in a house together. What was going down here?
Yeah, he so the house didn't start initially. I started treatment with him in January 90. His treatment was a form of primal scream therapy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he also told me, I mean, remember, I'm 24, it's 1990, so very different world. The internet did not exist to try to wrap your head around that one. Okay, so he told me he had trained under Janov in the late 60s, early 70s in LA at the Primal Institute. I didn't know, any of that. I bought Janov's book, I read a bit of it. And so the main treatment would be primal scream therapy. And he said early on, it was to address sort of the trauma from childhood.
Many people won't know what that is. Can you just give in the briefest description of what primal screen therapy is?
So primal scream therapy, created by Arthur Janov in the late 60s, was one of many types of, you could say, feeling therapies, extreme feeling treatments. There were others. This is probably the most famous, and I think it still exists. And it involved, reliving
Yeah.
childhood traumas in a very controlled environment, typically on a mattress lying down, regressing, not talking about former lives regressing, but regressing to an
Yeah.
infant state. And there's procedures you do to get into that state. And then reliving the trauma, the
So
crying, the
dangerous.
screaming, extreme screaming, and then using a baseball bat against a punching bag to externalize rage, rage against your abusers. And so he taught me how to do this process. I started it. He put me on medication, and there was no discussion early on about, changing sexuality, but that's quickly where it went. So the medication was increased quickly to high dosages.
And can I just jump in?
Mhm.
You had gone for therapy, but you were already out. So what was it just to deal with your childhood sexual abuse, or was it, did you want, because some people who are gay want to get treatment to stop themselves being gay. It's internalized homophobia, but
Yeah.
it's a thing.
So, absolutely. 1989 for me at that age, it was very confusing. It probably, if I could ask my younger self, he probably wouldn't even be able to answer that question. All I knew was that I was extremely distressed. I never forgot about the childhood molestation. By my late teens, I knew that I was gay, but I had a lot of difficulty reconciling that. As I say, when you're the object of your desire, males, is the same sex as the person who abused me. It was fraught with turmoil. Okay, I had sex with men. I was out. It was also the age of AIDS. I came of age during that period, and gay sex was a death sentence. And I remember just feeling overwhelming fear around my future. Like the sex is linked to abuse, having sex could kill me.
Yeah.
All of this was happening at the same time. Then I came out as gay to my family. They rejected me. Um, like huge amount of arguments, and I fled my home city. There was also a lot of complicated intergenerational trauma. My parents had come from post World War II Europe, communist states, and they, came to Canada, and there was a lot of trauma from their lives, the war, and I grew up with that. That was part of my life. But I could see it. I could see that this trauma wasn't mine per se. It was my parents, but I couldn't separate. So I went to this doctor. I mean, I was depressed. I was suicidal. I was highly anxious, insomnia, just all of these things happening. Okay. And it was like just walking into a doctor's office and saying, help me. I mean, really, it comes down to that
Yeah.
simple. Help
Exactly.
me. I had eating disorders in my late teens, early 20s, all of these things. And I'll just say very quickly, after 2020, and I started to understand and learn and research what was going on with trans and trans kids who were calling themselves trans, I could see that so many of them were calling themselves trans. And I was similar to them. I'd had the same upbringing and the same life. There was trauma, there was same-sex attraction, there was internalized homophobia, there was all of these things. And I could see that if I'd come of age now, I would have been medicalized. And this was horrifying to me. Okay. So this is why I started the treatment. The medications escalated rapidly. And then within 1 year, he told me I could not continue with treatment unless I moved into a house with other patients because it was too risky. Again, I'm young and going by his advice, and he would often say, "You do as you're told, or I'm ending your treatment." And that to me was more horrifying. My medical
Wow.
doctor, my general practitioner said, "There's no one else that I can refer you to. You'll go on a wait list for 2 years." And I was just like, I cannot wait 2 years. I am like life and death. So I just continued with this man. So I moved into a house with other patients. It was literally just a house on a street. We found a house to rent. We lived together, but it was a very weird. It's like the house at the end of the street, that type of horror movie, because we had a workroom. You call it a primal scream
Oh
workroom
my
that we
God.
built in our basement, padded walls, the whole thing. So much of what happened in that house, sadly, I learned years later, was just the same thing that had happened to people in the early 70s. We had intensives where other patients would come and live with us for 3 weeks, and we would feed them and house them. We would have our sessions in the house. We would go to the office, all of these things. These types of, cult-like therapeutic cults existed in the early 70s. I didn't know
Yeah.
any of that when I was 24,
It,
25,
That is
26.
what it
in
sounds
the
like.
early, yeah, but in the early 70s, yeah, I
Yeah,
did think
yeah,
so.
yeah.
I did not know in the early 90s that
But
was go.
but
I know there
I
was
mean,
all sorts going down,
yeah,
but
recover memory. This is exactly what they were doing with the multiple
I
personalities
know,
and recover
but
memory.
all
Isolate
this
them, put them all
primal,
together. They had the ab reactions, which is exactly like
Ad
this primal scream.
reactions.
They
Yeah,
had the padded room, the making them
yeah,
scream and thrash and flail
oh my
around
God.
and relive the
yeah,
supposed trauma of their childhood. It's the same thing, but just a parallel
yes.
world.
And so I was the only patient of this doctor amongst, he saw a lot of people. I was in groups, I was in individual sessions. So I saw like hundreds of people that was gay or that thought he was gay. And so my treatment changed. It was different from a lot of other people. Very quickly, as I say, within a year, he reframed the primal scream for me was about um, uh, reverting to my innate heterosexuality. Trauma had caused my homosexuality or the idea that I thought I was gay. And so, with enough primal, with enough medication, with enough whatever he needed to do, I would I could revert to my base heterosexuality. This was his stated goal. This is what, and I argued early on. I said that's crazy, and it just went on and on, the arguments, until finally it was like, do as I'm told, do as you're told, or leave. So the medications, to put it in perspective, we're talking one sedative, 4 antidepressants at one time at the same time, and then I had an overdose. About
Oh,
a year and a half into treatment, he kept escalating the dosages because at the end of the day, he was trying to stop my sexual desires,
drive.
my erotic, yeah, and it wasn't working. I mean, it was working to a degree, but I still felt drawn to males, like, right? I mean, it's at that point, so I'm being like really candid and blunt here, but at that point, we're not talking about being able to have sex. He had suppressed all libido,
Oh,
but my attraction was still there. So he just kept escalating the dosages. What I learned years later is the one that he escalated the highest, called Elavil, was one of these tricyclic antidepressants that caused many fatalities in the 90s. Again, I didn't know any of this at the time. So what I found out later is 250 milligrams for Elavil would be considered the highest dose for somebody institutionalized.
oh,
We're talking about a hospital, like a psychiatric ward hospital. He had me
sedated.
on, yeah, he had me on 600
Wow.
milligrams.
Wow.
So
And
I,
other stuff too.
and other stuff. There were 4 antidepressants concurrently, the sedative, and at this point, he had also introduced ketamine, the
Yeah.
injections of ketamine hydrochloride.
This
you
guy
know,
was insane.
it's like I laugh or I.
Cry.
It's not a laughter. It's like a disbelief still
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Decades have gone by, but it still leaves me with this feeling like it's another life, it's another
How
person.
did you get out? You must have been really
Yeah, so I'll try to jump to
scuttled.
that, but I overdosed literally one day. It's like a breakdown. I mean,
Yeah.
and he put me on antipsychotic at that point, in addition to the other drugs. And so the ketamine was introduced earlier, with weekly injections of ketamine, with him cuddling me to like reparent me. Reparenting was another one of these crazy
Okay.
things that it started in the 70s or late 60s. And he had hired a woman to act as our surrogate mother. So there was reparenting with her as well.
Oh
Oh my
no.
God.
And then, when nothing was, quote, working, as I was still attracted to males, he started aversion therapy, which was bottling my feces and having me smell it whenever I felt sort of drawn to men. And his rationale that he told me was, I needed to associate my attraction in a negative way to redirect me back to heterosexuality.
Oh my
So
goodness.
cruel.
So, and then when that still didn't work because I was still just drawn to who I was drawn to, he threatened the electrodes on my genitals. Now he didn't ever do it, but the threat was there, and he threatened a few times, and that was just, I remember still just feeling numb. I mean, I was numb from all the medications, but when he introduced the aversion therapy and the threat of the electrodes, it's just numb with there was no cognition anymore. Like I was not thinking anymore. These drugs eliminated the possibility of independent thinking,
Wow.
rational,
Yeah.
objective
Yeah.
questioning of anything. So how did it end? After 6 years, the house closed. We spiraled into like this primal state of hysteria in the house. I mean, it's something out of Lord of the Flies, truly. And he said the house would need to end. And so we all went our own ways. And at that point, that's literally 6 years almost to the day, I went to live on my own, and I started, and I lowered, and the dosages of my medications were being lowered, and my independent thinking slowly returned. Literally, it was like slowly turning on the switch to my brain. And it wasn't until I started thinking clearly that I understood I had not been thinking clearly for years. These drugs impaired the ability to think clearly. There was an internal logic to my therapy and others that was internal to its paradigm that seemed to make sense. Craziness makes sense to a crazy person.
Yeah.
And not to make light of it, an ideology, a self-referential ideology will always make sense to the person in that loop, right? These are the things I recognized years later in the gender world. All of these things, why kids end up going to ask for help, how they were now being ensnared, how they believed what they were being told, the indoctrination, the cultic mentality. So anyways, I left the therapy. I started to realize what had happened. Oh my God. And within 2 years, I filed a complaint to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. I think everywhere in the Western world, they have these colleges, right?
Yeah.
So I filed a complaint letter to the one that oversaw this doctor, psychiatrist, that I was told would last like 3 weeks. It lasted 2 years. The investigation, and then ultimately an ethics committee hearing where I went to it with the doctor, and the doctor had his lawyer, and then I sued him for medical malpractice. And the medical malpractice suit was primarily for unethical treatment of my sexuality, all the drugs, all the ketamine, everything. But there was a lot more going on in that world, right? There was the whole cultic environment. We lived in this house, we were isolated. We ended up doing his chores and cooking for him and cleaning his houses and taking care of his pets. That truly, it was like a cult environment. It really was. So the lawsuit was all of this. The lawsuit and the ethics complaint were ultimately very unsatisfying. He continued to practice without much of a reprimand, and the lawsuit settled out of court.
What?
Yeah.
So how did they justify that? How is he justified in continuing?
Well, he denied all allegations, of course. And at around this time of my treatment, during the lawsuit, the DSM, right, the Psychiatric Bible, the DSM changed its definition. They removed homosexuality in 1973, but it didn't really get removed. It just got reframed. So now it was still sort of a mental illness if you didn't want to be homosexual.
Ego dystonic homosexuality. Yes. But that's one of my questions though, because I wanted to ask you what you thought of that diagnosis, because I thought that was clinically useful. As long as you're not doing conversion therapy, you're actually helping the person accept their sexuality.
I just don't think that's the way it worked out, right? Okay. Because
like
these terms,
dysphoria.
Yeah.
Right. But okay, but I just want to say though, when they removed ego dystonic homosexuality in DSM-3 revision in 1987 because they felt that it would open the door to conversion therapy. However, the people with ego dystonic homosexuality, which is internalized homophobia, still exist, and now they're filtered into gender dysphoria, and they get the new conversion therapy, and they get the body parts chopped off. So I think that was a better diagnosis than trans, certainly.
Yeah, so that's coming. That's like years down the road, all of that. But for me at that time, the way I could see it, well, not at that time, but years later, looking back, like during the lawsuit, actually, even after the lawsuit, I was still sort of in a numb state. 2002, 2003, when it settled, the internet was basically still new. So, what struck me, the irony later was, you make gay people crazy by treating them to try to change them. And then suddenly you change the definition and say, oh, okay, so you don't need to change, but if you don't like being gay, now that's a disease. So, we feel bad about ourselves because we've been told that who we are is a disease. And so now that's being treated. The fact that we don't like who we are. I mean, it's just like, it just goes around and around. This is why when I
Sure.
started to write and then advocate, for me, it was always about end all treatments, just like fuck off, like
I
let
can
these
imagine.
people just live their
Yeah,
lives,
really.
right? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you don't want to be gay, you're damned. If you now struggle with being gay, you're damned, right? So it's like there was no win situation. And so during the lawsuit, suddenly everything was reframed towards me. It was me because I didn't like being gay. And that was why I went to
Oh,
see
they
him.
turned it on you.
They
Mm,
turned it on
mm.
me. And so the questions were like, well, when did you first decide you wanted to be heterosexual?
Mm.
Let's be clear, though. You weren't seeking conversion therapy, I suppose, is my question.
The term conversion therapy didn't exist. It's hard to talk about
Yeah.
these things and for people
Yeah.
today to even
You,
understand these
from
things
what I can
through it.
gather,
Yeah.
you were distressed and sex was
Just needed help.
definitely a part of it. You were just
Yes.
distressed
Yeah.
and
You
vulnerable.
just
Yeah.
Yeah.
needed help.
Yeah.
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 I mean, the bulimia, the
Yeah.
Oh,
anorexia,
Could I
the
get a
the
little snapshot? Sorry to jump across you. I shouldn't.
yeah, yeah.
There's so many questions, but
I
you
know.
said you had something like gender dysphoria as a kid. Was that pre any sort of abuse? Were you one of these feminized little boys, or what was going down there?
Um, so this is one of many things I started to recognize post 2020. Like I could have been one of them, one of these
Yeah.
trans kids. When I was like 13, I when everyone was out of the house, I stole my sister's makeup, her bra, and I locked myself in a bathroom and I put on all this makeup and her bra because I just felt like a girl. I thought I should be a girl because I didn't think in terms of gay, homosexual, but I was drawn to the boys in a way that clearly, and I can say this in retrospect, but I clearly at the time was causing me distress. It was distressing to me, and it's also a very different
Oh,
world than
well.
today, right? I mean, like gay was barely mentioned. Homosexuality was only recently taken out of psychiatric manuals and only recently decriminalized in
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I thought it would make sense if I was a girl drawn to boys, like mommy and daddy,
And were
right? I
you
mean,
like that before that? Like, were you like that as a little boy, or was
well,
it
the
like
abuse
only
happened
when you were a
very
teenager?
young.
Did it?
Yeah, the sexual abuse happened very young. We're talking 6, 7 years old. And so, I've never claimed to say it's a direct correlation because how can you ever know, right? I mean, I've only lived the life I've lived, but I was abused, sexually abused. And then I was clearly a type of boy. Today would be called trans because I was very effeminate. I was kind of chubby and I had these like they looked like breasts, chubby little boy, extremely sensitive. Basically, anything that would be um, associated with the girls was what I liked. I liked the pink. I liked the dolls. I liked the playing, Betty Crocker. I liked cooking in the kitchen with my mom. I liked the music that was more, gentle. All of these things, just classic, right? So putting on the makeup and a bra just seemed to externalize how I felt. I just felt like a little girl. But it was secret, right? I mean, I knew that I couldn't tell anyone this. And what we know now, what I know now, I mean, not just now, I mean, I've known for years, is these types of kids typically grow up to be gay, right?
Yeah.
As I did, if just left alone and maybe supported and encouraged and not, shamed. So that was what was happening to me. And then as I moved more into my puberty, post puberty, the body hatred,
Wow.
um, the chubbiness, the shame in my body. I started a form of cutting very
Oh,
early. Yeah. So, and
eating
all of these,
disorders.
yeah. And all of these things just became even more heightened in the treatment. When I was going through this treatment with the psychiatrist, I started cutting again secretly. When he found out, he just exploded in a rage, which obviously just made it all worse. And so, all of these things were happening
You
in my
mentioned
teens.
cross-dressing, kind of a form of cross-dressing
Yeah.
quietly and secretly was when you were trying to figure out, where you were going. Did that maintain? Did that continue?
No, no. I remember that doing it once, but the feeling never went away. And the feeling was I was just more like the girls than the boys. I just didn't, and I didn't have boyfriends. I had all the girls loved me. I loved all the girls. I played
Yeah.
with the girls. The few boys I played with were probably like me, like we were sort of
Yeah.
kind of girly boys. And so I didn't have any way to understand it. And also, I just want to comment on your term of the conversion therapy. Remember now, in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, these
Yeah.
terms didn't exist. So it definitely didn't exist when I was in treatment with this doctor.
Yeah.
I never thought terms like conversion therapy, reparative therapy, sexual orientation, change efforts, these things did not exist. So when I came out of the treatment, I still had no way to quite articulate what had happened. And this was one of the most
Wow.
distressing things post treatment is I couldn't put it into words. I couldn't encapsulate what had happened. And literally the first 2 years, I was just shell shocked. I remember walking around the city in a state of just shell shock. And I kept thinking, why does no one notice this hole in my gut? I mean, I still remember that feeling. And so I filed the complaints, the lawsuit, and then I started to write. I thought, okay, I will use the writing. I mean, I'd been a writer. I had started my university degree in creative writing, had to drop out because of the therapy. So writing was, something that I was drawn to. So I thought, I can write about it and that could help stop this from happening to others. And so I slowly got some publishing, some articles published. And then I was working on a book. And the book took me ultimately 20 years to write. A lot was happening at that time in the world. The T got added to the LGB. There was a 2015 article in the New York Times where a young person who, and it's mentioned in the essay, Mia, that you read, the young person who identified as trans girl, you could say, so born a boy, killed themselves.
Oh, Leela.
After, Leela. Yeah. And it was a significant moment, I think, in the history of
huge moment. For
yes.
those that don't know, look it up. Leelah, Leela Alcorn. Like just a huge moment in kind of Middle America.
Yes.
Coming across and
well,
Canada.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And I would just say, if you read, like when you read that New York Times article, which I did read because you linked it, the opening paragraph, I can't even believe that it's still there. They breaks every single rule about reporting on suicides. Just bear that in mind.
Yeah.
It was a dreadful case, a dreadfully
Awful.
complex case, and the reporting of it was an absolute disaster.
Totally.
Really, really bad. It's worth studying the entire thing because it's awful. And it was a pivotal point in this whole trans...
Pivotal point in sort of the movement of conversion therapy, bans on conversion therapy. President Obama publicly said post the suicide that he condemned these treatments, and they were conflated. So treatments, conversion treatments of gays and for gender identity, just all in one. And it reinforced for me this merging of the two. And this is how it was presented. The Human Rights Campaign in the same article provided the definition of conversion therapy, and there was no attempt, or maybe it didn't even exist at the time, that the ultimate end definition of, quote, trans conversion therapy maybe didn't even exist at the time, but they didn't do anything to help sort of extrapolate it. They just merged it into one. So it was treatments of sexual orientation and gender in one.
And you saw that happen. This is where it gets, I mean, what I'd like to understand is you credit Obama with merging the two, and I had never put that together, but that makes complete sense. He merged the two, gender identity and gay conversion therapy, in the public consciousness with that statement after Layla Alcorn was
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
the tragedy. But you saw that happen. What did you think of that? Did you think, oh, gender identity? What does this even mean?
So, as I say, toward the end of my treatment, when the drugs, the primal, the aversion, the threats, and when none of it worked, he basically just went after my overt femininity.
Right.
And
Okay.
during
Yeah.
session after session, and what can you do about that? How can
Oh,
you
Yeah.
attack somebody's femininity, masculinity? So it's like, okay, you need to join, um, what are they called? Outbound for men. You need to go hiking with men. I mean, it's so absurd, right? But I mean, that's the world. You need to stop baking at the house. You need to stop looking at flowers. I want you to stop writing poetry,
Yeah,
and you
it's like
need to.
forcing the little boy to stop playing with dolls. You're
Yeah,
talking like
exactly.
that's what it was in your
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete
So,
sense.
but in today's world, what that was in my mind also like the conversion therapy for gender,
Yeah.
right? Trying to change their expression of masculinity and femininity, trying to make the boy more masculine, the girl more feminine. For the girls, put them in dresses, wear the lipstick, all of
Yeah.
this. So
Yeah.
when the 2015 article came out, it wasn't for me at that moment a flag. I mean, the merging was, I thought, a mistake because again, two trajectories. I knew enough based on my treatment and my life and what I'd learned. Sexual desire was completely separate from this femininity, masculinity. I mean, some gay boys are masculine, some are feminine. I mean, like, you can't quite say all gay boys are going to be overtly feminine, right? So, but I knew that they were still separate. I thought it was a mistake to conflate, but at the same time, I thought, okay, as long as all quote conversion therapy ends, we're good. And if it does nothing but that, okay, great. Just let's
and tell
end
me,
all treatments.
And so this is 2015, and then you want to bring this to Canada. Am I correct? This
Well,
fires something in you. You want to bring this
yeah.
type of ban to Canada.
So I hadn't thought that. I mean, a lot happened very quickly, but in 2015, I was still like writing articles. I was still working on my book. Conversion therapy, the term, and reparative therapy were, fairly recent, and so I started using those terms. And I think I only mentioned them once in my book at the very end. So really, my book describes what happened to me without reducing them to these, reductive labels, which is part of the huge problem today.
Yeah.
Because the labels get expanded and inverted and changed using the same terms, but suddenly we're talking about something else entirely. So in 2015, I didn't quite see all of that. My book got published in 2017. And for me at that point, it was like full on emailing politicians, emailing, our new prime minister, Justin Trudeau, emailing his special advisor on LGBTQ2, whatever, plus. I didn't care. I didn't like the acronyms, but I thought, okay, just end all treatments, talk to the politicians, try to, get them to speak out. I didn't see anyone talking about this. And for me, for years, that was part of my world. I didn't see anyone else talking about this, and it had happened to me. When I was trying to get my
wow.
book published, editors were saying, this doesn't happen anymore. Conversion therapy doesn't happen anymore. And I'm like, well, hello, I'm here, and it happened. The problem is people think in terms of the label, and they don't sort of break it out in terms of what happened in your treatments. There's treatments that happen that go fly under the radar because nobody calls them conversion therapy.
Can I
Mhm.
just interject? I have a confession to make, and you may
Yeah.
have heard me say this publicly, that I had that opinion though of these conversion therapy bans, and I've said it in many
Me
public
too.
interviews that it was a Trojan horse. They banned something that
Yes.
wasn't happening, gay conversion therapy, in order to
But
slip in gender
yeah,
identity. And
can I, yeah, can I come in though on that point because I've said the same. However, your guy, Peter, and I don't know wherever he is now, but this was an extremely unethical crank in the very,
Not
Yeah.
um,
mainstream, yeah?
yeah, well, I would say way beyond mainstream, like Primal Scream in 1990 in a house, and everything he did was so profoundly unethical.
It
This,
was,
like
but
you said, it was like cult-like. It was.
yeah, but you know what one thing it taught me is that if it could happen to me, it could happen to someone else.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I kept getting met by disbelief after disbelief. There's a line in my book where something like the disbelief, um, the horror of it causes disbelief, something like that. And that's the thing. When I would tell people my story, the horror of it would immediately
But
result
it
in,
is,
but that couldn't happen.
yeah,
You know,
but
it's like,
is the question, because I've heard some dreadful reports, and I really do think psychiatry is the issue here, and madcap psychiatrists having too much control over patients and too much freedom. And this guy was conversion therapy for you. I would have no doubt that other people who came to him, it was other things he was doing to be very cruel
oh,
and
sure.
manipulative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't just banging out conversion therapy. He
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
crackpot.
So I just want to make a leap also for the viewers so they can connect the dots. You know, for me, with my history, we're talking trauma, body dysmorphia, that, you know, the feeling I was more like a girl than a boy, hatred of my body, same sex desire emerging. I end up in what ultimately is a form of conversion therapy. Today, I see the same thing. I see kids who have the trauma, the same sex. There's autism as well, which wasn't my history, but so we have all of this. We have girls who want out of their bodies. Okay,
Yeah.
they just want out of, and they end up in quote gender affirmative care. For me, gender affirmative care is the new euphemism for conversion therapy. This is the thing.
Exactly.
Helen Joyce, when I read her book in 2021, 2022, so I started to read all these books. And I got to the line in her book where she said, conversion therapy, gender affirmative care is the postmodern gay conversion therapy of the 21st century. It was like neon coming through the page. Thank you. Somebody had said it.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I heard somebody say it.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to hear more people say it, but that was it. And that is what it is.
Yeah, you
So,
collided with a homophobe doing wacky, crazy conversion therapy with this type of primal scream therapy. These kids today collide with a gender ideologue who's doing
yeah.
another conversion therapy that involves body part amputation.
And so there's a trajectory to conversion therapy, as horrific and extreme, granted that what happened to me, to what happens to kids. If you could go on the spectrum of treatments, and mine is like getting up there, you know, the drugs, all of this, the next step is let's start cutting off body parts. Okay.
I know.
um and so that that to me, that's just what I see now. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
True. Can
uh
you walk us through that process? Like,
yeah.
can you walk us through the Vancouver ban, the
Mm.
federal campaigning, and then when you write about it, it really sends chills down my spine. Like your moment of kind of realizing the monster that you helped create is the way it
Yeah.
is in my mind.
So after my book was published, I reached out to Vancouver City Council committee on, here we go, the acronym, right? The LGBTQ, whatever. I didn't like the acronym, but I thought, okay, this is where I need to go. Bureaucracy, I did it. To ask that a municipal ban on conversion therapy could be instituted. They invited me. I came and I spoke to the committee. They agreed. We started to work on the bill. I helped them work on the bill. It went to the city council. I was at city council June, I think it's June 8th, 2018. I testified in front of council. They passed it unanimously the same day. And significant, so this was Canada's first municipal ban. Significantly, I had wanted the ban to include all ages
Yeah.
because, you know, I was a legal adult when I went to this man. I was not a 12-year-old. And so, you know, people always say, well, you know, adults, they should be able to do what they want. Well, no, because we're talking about helping environments,
Totally
helping
agree.
professionals, and
Vulnerability
anyone,
is vulnerability.
vulnerability. People
Yeah.
go to seek help in this arena when they are typically distressed, trauma.
At
And
their
so,
lowest.
Right.
They're
Goodness me, the
really, really
parallels
fragile.
here, the
Yeah. And
parallels to trends here.
yeah, it's all there. And so, you know, for me, I thought, okay, this needs to be banned for all ages. Minors were always part of these bans. I wanted it adults included because I had been an adult. So we're not talking about adults in any other frame of mind. We're talking about adults who go to seek help by a professional, like mental health professional, are already um, vulnerable, traumatized. They do not have the ability to give informed consent, period, from day one. And so you're always going on the assumption that I trust you. That's the assumption. First, do no harm. So the ban came into effect. It was approved by City Council. It was Canada's first municipal ban. I had been writing an article on the hope that it would get passed with Maclean's, Canada's news magazine. The article was published the same day. I was texting the editor. It was very exciting at the time. And the article basically was a call to have a national ban. Like, here's Vancouver's ban. It's a first step, but we need to ban this across Canada. It felt very exciting to me at the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just, because I was looking into it, they did slip in gender identity, and then
Yes.
I watched you on Global or CTV or something. At the time, they interview you, and they mentioned gender identity
Yes.
once, but the entire interview is about sexual orientation, and that's what you're there. You can see that's what
Yes.
you're there talking about, and there's just this teeny little mention of gender identity that barely anyone notices.
So, I was there testifying. I watched the full city council meeting, but when you're in a moment like that, you can never quite get everything. So years later, in the last 3 or 4 years, as I was working on a new piece of writing, I searched for the video, because all city council meetings are typically videotaped. I found it literally buried into the archives of Vancouver City Council. And I watched it from beginning to end. I transcribed it from beginning to end. It took me weeks. There was zero discussion on gender identity, even though the municipal bill, included sexual orientation and gender identity. So for me in 2018, gender identity was still this sort of elusive idea around masculinity, femininity, boys who were more feminine, etc. And so there was never a discussion, there was never an understanding in my mind that kids would be medicalized.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to get caught up in the whole gender identity thing. I just thought, like, the ban will stop all treatments, period. That's where I was coming from. And I have to say also, I was just like a dog with a bone. For years, I was just like so focused on what had happened to me. And I'm not looking for a pity party, but I was also, the treatment was extremely traumatizing. It took me years to just sort of get my
What
life
happened
back.
to him, Peter? Like, what happened to that guy?
He went on practicing for years and years and years. And I think he's retired.
Alive?
I don't like,
Okay,
I do look him up occasionally. I think he's still alive. He moved back to his birth country. He's from Europe. I think he's still there. He might have died. I don't know. But he did go on to continue his private practice for decades after my treatment. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Can I just bring it back though, because I have something that I think is quite significant, and that is, you're saying that there was no mention of gender identity. I'll bet there was no definition of gender identity either, because that's another tactic that they do. They don't define it in any of these laws, but there was no mention of it during the whole hearing, debate, whatever.
Nothing.
Now, in reading your long essay that is wonderful, and I hope it gets published, there's a connection with, you get invited by Thomson Reuters to take part in an LGBT something panel. That is who published the infamous Denton's document, which is the playbook, the strategic playbook, how to get all of these unpopular gender identity laws written, enacted without anyone noticing it. And the classic tactic is tack it onto, so if you want gender identity conversion therapy bans, you tack it to gay conversion therapy. If you want self-ID for kids, you tack it on somehow to anti-abortion legislation. They've got this, it's a very clear tactic that is laid out in the Denton's document. And I can't help but feel that they just used you in this.
This is part of my reckoning. I think the last few years, I don't live my life as a victim. My parents came from trauma. I've had trauma in my life, but my way of learning from it and moving on has been very important to me. And a large part of that has been through the writing, and it was through the advocacy for a long time. All of which to say that, you see, I almost don't want to say it because it sounds kind of victim-y, but I do feel that my story, my book, because let's face it, in Canada, there was no other book by somebody who had lived through something like this. And I used that platform to help pass these laws. So I think that it was used. And at the time, I would have said, that's okay, use me. Like, if I can help end these treatments, that's why I've written the book. That was one of the main reasons. I wrote it to understand myself first and foremost. Why did I end up with this doctor? Why did I stay? What did I learn? Those were the three questions that guided me as I wrote that book. And I learned a lot about myself, and it took me years and years. So the writing took years, not just because of the effort of writing, but that self-realization process, unpacking my childhood, understanding what happened in the therapy. The drugs alone were so confusing. I relied on journals.
Yeah. This is the point. This was profoundly unethical therapy by any ethical standards.
So in the transcript of 2018, the city council, when I watched it and transcribed it, there was lots of discussion by city councilors on homosexuality, same-sex desire. Going back to the 80s, they discussed how this has been going on in psychiatry, and the removal in 73. So were all this being discussed. No one mentioned anything about gender, even though it was part of the bill. And I think for them, trying to give maybe them a little credit, these lawmakers, I think politicians, probably didn't understand, and it's worse that they didn't understand, because they should have understood. But they probably did. Yeah. You agree?
I do not believe for a moment they understood. And there's even all of them that wrote gender identity into every human rights code, whatever. None of them understood what they were supporting. They just went along with it because they thought it made them good people. Have you seen Sherry DeNovo, who put Ontario's human rights code? She got gender identity injected into Ontario's human rights code in 2012. She says in her memoir, nobody at the time knew the dramatic effect it would have on the way the entire province did business. I'm glad no one looked too closely. No one knew what they were supporting. She says it right out.
Yeah, she was one of I didn't have direct contact with her, but she was one of the people whose name sort of came through my world in all of these years of advocacy. So there's three other people that we talked about before me, and I'll mention them in a moment. But, just going to finish this in 2018, so there was no discussion in that city council. When I watched that video, it just reaffirmed for me, they didn't know what the hell they were passing. I didn't know what we were passing. The testimony, the other people who were there providing testimony, I think I was the only one with that sort of the breadth of my story, and definitely who had written a book. But there were, I think, two other people who testified in the sense of homophobia is terrible, and this is what leads to these treatments. Okay, so nobody understood. And then moving past that, that ban was covered internationally, Canada's first municipal ban, and I just pushed forward for the national ban. And so that was the next couple of years.
The momentum, huge momentum for you.
Yeah. And I had contact with advocates in the U.S. as well. There were efforts in the U.S. more at a state by state level, and smaller municipalities throughout the states to get these bans passed. All of them are combining the sexual orientation and gender. Again, I didn't understand what that could unleashed.
So we're coming up towards the end now, sadly. Bring us up to now, because what happened? Like, you know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
was there a moment where you said,
Yeah.
"Stop, reverse"?
The realization, it was during C6, was it not? Which you can
Yeah.
explain.
So can I just mention very quickly? So Christopher Wells was an associate professor in Calgary who I joined at a public forum in Calgary in February 2020 because Calgary was trying to pass its own ban. And I was there with him. He took a call from um, private sector advocates, people who were very concerned that this type of ban would result in minors being medicalized. And I was there when he took the call, and he said bluntly, that does not happen. It will not happen.
And just for the viewers, he was appointed to Canada's Senate. He is a
Yes.
Canadian senator, and he is the one who spreads more misinformation about
Yes.
this medical scandal than
Yeah.
anyone else in Canada, as far as I'm concerned.
So, I was there, I heard him say it, but the fact
You
that it was,
believed him.
I believed him, but the fact that it was being addressed, like people were asking the question, was kind of chilling to me because I would never have supported minors being medicalized. I didn't quite know what all these surgeries entailed, but I believed him. Another red flag was, what was it? There was three. There was him. There was Florence Ashley, who is a self-identified trans woman living back east. I think she now, I have to say about pronouns. Pronouns still leave me very confused. Anyways, so I was involved in British Columbia on 2 bills to try to get conversion therapy passed provincially. So I did the municipal, then the 2 bills, and I had direct contact with Florence Ashley. Florence Ashley drafted one of these bills, and in that bill, she removed she changed the definition of sexual orientation to make it only same or opposite gender attracted.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time being completely floored, completely confused, because I understood that that would basically remove sexuality from the equation. And I didn't understand how you could have a ban on conversion therapy for gay people whose attraction is for sex, same sex, but remove sexuality from the definition.
Oh,
I didn't understand that. So I removed myself from that group of people. If they wanted to move forward with this, and Florence Ashley drafted that bill, I thought, okay, I'm not up to having these arguments with people. Like, if they can't understand why removing same sex.
So you brought it up. You brought it up.
I brought it up.
Hey.
I brought it up. I said,
you.
like, why would we remove sexual attraction from a definition of sexual orientation? Because you have same sex or opposite sex attraction. Gender is not sex, sexuality.
It's not gender
right?
orientation. Yeah.
You can't have a logical discussion with Florence Ashley, though. That's
there was
impossible.
A third red flag.
Oh, yeah. This is one I'm interested in. Go.
So Florence Ashley was not.
Person?
Florence Ashley was not in the group, but she had drafted the bill. And I said to the group of people working on the bill, like when they basically said no to me, like, we're moving forward with this the way it's worded, I said, well, then I'm removing myself from the group. So that was Florence Ashley. And then when you mentioned the Thompson Reuters, there was that, but there was another panel I was on for Monk School in Toronto. Monk School of Global Affairs through University of Toronto. And I was invited to this panel to discuss C6, which was coming up toward the end of 2020.
That was our conversion therapy ban in a previous form.
Yeah. And Florence Ashley was on that panel. So it was a virtual panel. I said my piece, always, as I always had done, described what I lived through, why I wanted these treatments ended. Florence Ashley, to my shock, said she disagreed with bans on conversion therapy. She did not support them. She didn't think they should move forward. I was completely gobsmacked. It's like, why are you here then? Why are you on this panel? It took me years to sort of reflect on that moment. And the only way I can understand it is that she, and I remember the other person is Morgane Auger, who was also opposed. I had direct contact with Morgane as well. They were opposed to these bans because they probably knew as we didn't, that the bans could interrupt, quote, gender affirmative care for minors.
See, but that doesn't. I mean, these individuals rarely make any sense to me. But that
Yeah.
doesn't.
No,
It
yeah,
just doesn't make any sense because they pushed for these bans
yeah,
so that they could remove all of the barriers, remove all of the
yeah,
obstacles, and make medicalization the only option. But can we go to Morgan Auger, because I
yes.
watched that you did an interview with him in 2017.
Oh
But just
God.
God.
I want to know what you thought about that, because you're in the interview, you're talking about gay conversion
Yeah.
therapy, your own experience, and he keeps interjecting, talking about conversion therapy of transgender children, and it's all about transgender
Oh, I
children
was.
and
Oh, I
trans
better go
conversion
back and watch
therapy.
that.
Yeah.
And I just,
Right.
what was going through your mind, sat next to this man dressed as a woman who's talking about trans children and conversion therapy? You must. How did you feel?
You must have
What
been
did you
very
think?
distressed.
So, this is the problem that anyone will always face in today's world, looking at old clips, reading old articles, because you think of it in terms of today's world,
Yeah.
but we didn't have those understandings at the time. That video, a friend said to me after my book came out, oh, a friend who was active in politics said, this person, Morgan Auger, active in politics, quote, trans woman, why don't you do like an interview with her? She has a platform. She could help, push your book. I thought, super, why not? So she invited me to her home. We did this interview. Um, and what was going through my head? Again, the trans to me at that time, um, laws hadn't
It
been
was just a
like women's,
distraction by the look of you. It was just a kind
yeah,
of a
like
sideshow.
the pieces weren't there. Okay. The
Yeah.
pieces for me were not there. The event in question around Morgan was at the Vancouver Public Library after my book came out, the 1 year anniversary. We did a book event and she interviewed me, and though that was fine, and I read from my book, and at the end there was a Q&A from the audience, and a man stood up and he turned to her and said, what Peter had been through I would never support. This is horrendous for gay people. But Morgan, kids are being medicalized. Kids are going through treatments. They're having these surgeries. What do you say about this? This is torture. I remember in the moment thinking,
Oh my God.
what is he saying? Like, and Morgan evaded and was defensive and didn't make sense. And we know now these people, when they start talking, just like gibberish comes out of their
I
mouth.
have experience with this.
And so he didn't make sense, and the man pursued and asked again and again, and it's just more of this gibberish. And I remember after that thinking, like that was another red flag for me. Okay, like who are these minors that are being, I didn't know, I didn't research. And I have to say, and I'm not happy about this, I was probably willfully ignorant to some degree, because I had spent decades by now
Yeah.
writing my book, trying to make a difference, trying to stop treatments, thinking the whole time, as long as all treatments end, we're good, just stick to
I can
the
just imagine, can I just say, I can imagine me and Mia, and we're driving forward and we've been
yeah,
decades at it and we're just about to get over the line and this sideshow comes in and you're like, what?
yeah,
Sorry? What?
yeah,
Anyway, let's keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of my questions. I feel like you had put so much into this, invested so much of your life, and built upon your own horrible, terrible experiences. And then along comes something that doesn't make any sense. It's all bewildering and confusing. And you've just, like, you have to have that tunnel vision,
yeah,
keep your eye focused on the end
Oh,
point, and you therefore can't let it in. But of course, can we get to this, because
yeah,
it's quite, when you describe this moment and what you now understand, it really does chill me to the bone. Can we go there?
yeah. It took me a long time after the bill. So I testified in December 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
2021 was the game changer for me, because this is when I started to read Abigail Schreier's book. I read, I'm not sure if I read Helen Joyce's book 21 or 22, but I started to read a lot of older books about, transsexualism, the new transgender movement, And let me also say that we're talking about an ideology that not all people who call themselves trans support either,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is important because for me, it's not about attacking individuals. Although if there are individuals who are captured by the ideology, it is still the ideology I'm referring to and not the individual.
Me too.
Although
Always.
some individuals have gone so far that they are fucking crazy and they are causing serious harm, bodily harm in some cases to people because of
Yeah.
an ideology, which is not uncommon from cult members. The cult is now your next door neighbor, right? Cults are no longer behind a barbed wire fence. They are your doctors, they are your media personalities, and we are all being indoctrinated slowly from watching news, period. So after the testimony in 2021 and I started reading and I started to understand, I mean, I was getting invitations at that point to do keynote addresses. I was thrilled. It felt like decades of work finally coming to
Wow.
fruition. And then the pieces started to come together for me. And it's not like it was obvious. I had to sort of search it out. It's so counterintuitive. It is so, you cannot see something that you don't know exists.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it was happening, so I couldn't see it. But then when I put the pieces and read the books, these bills, and especially the federal one, which is way more detailed than the municipal one, was basically conversion therapy for sexual orientation um, was still, being banned. Treatments to trying to stop treatments of sexual orientation. Conversion therapy for trans is like the opposite. It's basically codifying into law the access to treatments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're ending treatments for gay people and you're codifying into law access, because without the access for trans people, that is conversion therapy to them.
Yeah.
The denial of treatments. So they want the
Mm-hmm.
treatments, the puberty blockers for minors, the cross-sex hormones, the surgeries also sometimes for minors. So it's the opposite in one bill. Both are happening. Um, at some point, I came across Florence Ashley had written a book, and it was published by the University of British Columbia, famous press, supported by the then UN expert on gender or sexual orientation, blah, blah, blah. And the whole book is about trans conversion practices. This book was written, published after the national ban came into effect. And it said basically nothing about gays and sexual orientation. It was about the horror of trans conversion practices. And she went on to explain that gender diverse is how she worded it. Gender nonconforming kids typically grew up to be trans. When I
Not
read
gay.
that, yeah,
No.
and she mentioned me in her book. When I
Yeah.
found the book
Oh
and I saw my
no.
name mentioned, I thought, what the hell? I go to read the passage that she had written and that UBC published, apparently fact checked, and it was just flagrant lies. She basically never says I'm gay, never. She just puts me in the same sentence with a known trans person, known publicly identified trans person. Anyone reading the book would assume Peter Gajdics
Wow.
is a trans person. And she explains how I went through this conversion practice. Again, people would assume it means trans conversion practice. And she says that I had ostensibly, is her word, consented. I mean, that
Mm.
alone, I mean, I had been on the panel with Florence. I had had discussions with Florence. I had my whole book, I had said I never consented. You cannot
We're all
consent.
very
Yeah,
familiar with
yeah, yeah.
Florence. I
So,
mean, can I just okay, so all of your decades of
yeah,
work, right
yeah,
at the end, trans comes along, co-ops the entire
yeah,
movement, steals it from you. No one's talking about gay anymore. It's all about trans.
yeah.
There's one line in that essay that has yet to be published of yours that described the moment that Bill C4, our conversion therapy ban in 2021 passed.
Yeah.
Describe that moment. You're home alone. How do you feel?
So I watched it online. We're still in lockdown from
Yeah.
COVID, right? I mean, even the testimony was done virtually. Normally, I would have flown to Ottawa to do it. So that was virtual. So I'm alone in my apartment through all of this stuff, like doing the testimony, watching a year later as the House of Commons debates quickly passes the bill, unheard of in the history of Canada's House of Commons, unheard of, both parties
I
agreeing.
should tell you a lot.
Yeah,
Tells you everything.
at that point, so we're talking December 2021
Yeah.
when it passed, and I'd spent the year, a lot of reading. I was numb. I watched it just numb. I'm not sure the sentence you mean, but there was
I
the
have it written. Can I read your sentence to you?
Sure,
Because it's
sure.
brutal. You say you felt nothing, no excitement, no sense of victory. And that is your victory, but it's not because they snatched it from you.
Yeah.
And you understand that.
And I didn't understand all the pieces in that moment, but I knew enough. This is bad news. And I also, in lead up to that moment, the year of 2021, there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
It was late. It's too late. This had happened.
The monster had been unleashed, and you can't.
The Trojan horse had been unleashed. I didn't see all of the pieces. For instance, I didn't know exactly that I wouldn't have been able to articulate that gender affirmative care, specifically for minors, is conversion therapy under a new name. I wouldn't have been able to articulate that. That sort of came in the months that followed, like when the bill passed when the bill came into effect in January 2022, with very quickly all of these things. And, I had discussions with some people in the publishing world, where I would try to explain this, and I was met with resistance, arguments. The advocates that I'd worked with for years wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah.
I was now spreading hatred. I was transphobic. It was a state of, I think in that essay I say something about the existential horror I felt, because my whole hope and work was to try to stop treatments. I tried to include adults in that, but all along I thought, minors would be included, which they are and they were, but now minors were the most at risk, because minors are the ones that really, I don't agree with the idea that an adult, who just wakes up or whatever and says, I'm trans and now I want all these surgeries and I can walk into female spaces because I'm a woman. This is insanity. Okay, trans women are not real women. When that phrase started to pop up, I thought, okay, what am I missing? Mm-hmm. Like, everybody's saying trans women are women. No, they're not. Like, what is, and I thought it's like I was back in the therapy with the doctor. And this is what was happening during this 2020, 2021 period, when I was learning and watching and reading two things. It felt like, one, I'm reliving the molestation all over, because if kids can ostensibly, to use Florence's word, consent to surgeries on their sexual organs, how can anyone stop kids from consenting to sex with adults? This is going to happen. This is where we're going. And why do people not see this? Like, this is the movement. Okay. First, you say they can consent, or they've consented to the, blockers, the hormones, whatever, the surgeries. And then you say, well, they can consent. So, sex with adults, what's the problem? So that was causing me so much distress, seeing that this is where it was going. And then I just felt like living through the whole treatment with the doctor again, because now the treatments with medical professionals, first do no harm, but they were doing all this harm, was happening on a global scale. And it just,
to largely gay and lesbian adolescents and kids, childhood onset, destined to grow up to be gay.
One quick thing, like conversion therapy, or what we now call conversion therapy, but those treatments typically, historically, had happened to adults, right? So they're gay, they're out, whatever, or not out, but they're mostly adults. I shouldn't even say that. I'm sure there were minors, but who were identified as being either gay or homosexual or whatever, and they were treating them. Now, what this gender affirmative care does is they treat them before they're even, quote, a grown gay. Like, stop it. They never have a chance.
Yeah. Because we really are now going to have to wrap it up. I could talk to you for hours. This is fascinating. What my last question is, the UK
Yeah.
is right now debating, I can't even believe it, but they're right now debating their own conversion therapy ban, which is appallingly worded. It's absolute nonsense. What do you say to them? What do you say to the politicians in the UK right now who are thinking of passing this kind of law?
You know, these laws demand confrontation with an ideology that is recklessly destroying lives. And I will grant some people that they may not have seen that originally, that and maybe they didn't, and maybe there are really malevolent people who saw it and they still wanted to do it, but I think some may not have seen
Yeah.
it, and they were trying to just, quote, they thought, do the right thing, right side of history. Okay, we know enough now. I've said in this essay, I hope it gets published, but I say in other articles I published, and combining the two, you are basically codifying into law to end treatments on gays and to reinforce treatments on minors who would have ended up as gay. In other words, the second cancels out the first. Hello. You can't have the two together and think you're actually banning what we call conversion therapy, because it cancels itself out.
Totally. It nullifies. One nullifies the second.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if they do it anyways, I mean, the word evil, is just like overused. But to me, what more evil is there? Like, you are literally cutting people up. And beyond the cutting, we're talking about cutting people's lives up. Like, I can never get back the years that were stolen from me and the relationships that were impaired, and the trauma of the experience. When I watch these detransitioners, God love them, I'm thinking, they will never get back their breasts, because breasts are not like a lump of tissue that doctors add to men. Breasts are like an organ. They will never get back their breasts. The boys, God, who've gone through like penectomies and like had their penises inverted. Like, I've watched many of these males who now are detransitioning. So they said they were trans women, and it is so horrifying. I hope the lawsuits happen. But the countries like the UK who are yet to push a ban like this, I would implore them to not do it, to pause and to do more research on what it means when you say gender identity, what that means. I don't think, for the record, that people have gender identities. I think people have personalities, like we've always had butch girls, we've always had effeminate boys, and they were not medicalized. The history of gay advocacy, starting from the 19th century, was about not medicalizing people who were same-sex attracted, but acknowledging that they used, I think, more as metaphor, like the soul of a woman in the body of a man. They talk like this. Now they've physicalized it, right? They've said, oh, well, that means we need to medicalize the body to match the soul in the person. This is insanity gone amok.
Yeah.
It really is. Thank you, Peter. It's
Thank
a
you.
harrowing story, and it's a really, really important story, and I hope it goes everywhere, because it's such an important voice that you're adding to a fraught issue.
Thank you so much.